This week we travel the world. We celebrate the German success story of the Golf GTI. Nicky Fox visits the Yokohama tyre test track outside Tokyo. And we visit Madeira for a thrash around the island in a BMW Z3 Roadster. I say we, but unfortunately I personally had no part of that. That pleasure was left to the gentleman sitting to my right, who I'm sure you will recognise as our intrepid reporter, Mike Rutherford. Mike, welcome to the show. Nice to see you again. Now, we'll have more about the BMW a little bit later on in the programme. First of all, you've just been on a rather unusual trip, and I know you've described it as the drive of your life.
Yeah, it's easy to talk about the best car you've ever driven. It's kind of more difficult to talk about the ultimate journey you've ever done. I think I've probably just done it. 400 miles through the Andes, through northeast Argentina, on the borders with Bolivia and Paraguay. And the logical question, why? The reason was that we were test driving the new 1997 spec Chrysler Jeep Wrangler, the all-new Wrangler, new body, new interior, new suspension, engine improvements.
Well, you're kind enough to take a camera with you, so we've got some pictures to look at. Perhaps you could just talk us through these.
Well, that's the base camp. That's the lull before the storm, really. It was all pretty pleasant down there, but pretty soon it gets...
Hello, who's this?
I don't know who that fat git is. I think the camera's distorting his weight there.
We're having a sulk already.
Yeah, it's... well, I was particularly sulking, actually, when this local bandit actually walked along and helped himself to one of my many bottles of water in the boot of my car. We were on 8 litres of water a day, and the reason for that is quite simple, that there's a grave danger of dehydrating. That's just a little bit, just a very, very small part of the route ahead of us. And you can see here...
That's almost a road, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that was a real luxury. That was a proper piece of tarmac, but this is more typical of the sort of route, and I use the term loosely, that we followed. We followed the same track, really, as the Camel Trophy, which is the most demanding off-road journey in the world. That granite was lethal stuff. That was slicing the tyres. We got through 12 tyres on this particular trek.
That's a bit tiresome, having to change all those wheels.
It was indeed.
Did you have to do that?
No, we had servants for that sort of thing. In fact, we had backup vehicles. We had helicopters with medical teams on board. We had vehicles behind us who were refueling us.
Isn't it,
yeah, that's interesting. They brought a Cherokee along for the ride as well, just to prove the point that it's not just the Wrangler that can do a journey like that. We ate that horse actually that evening.
He wasn't too impressed. I could see his.
He knew it was coming. But yeah, there were Cherokees, there were Grand Cherokees there as well, just to prove that this is not just. These demanding conditions, although tough on the Wrangler, are also very, very user-friendly, if you like, for the more limo-like off-roaders from Chrysler. That's one of the many punctures, and I think you're about to see one of the many dead...
tyre victim.
Yeah, well, that's one of the many dead animals we saw en route. So much cattle out there, wild cattle, it just keels over and dies when it doesn't... Nobody bothers to take care of these wild animals. It's a little bit sad, actually.
Sure.
But, you know, Argentina, that's its biggest industry, beef, and they've got an awful lot of it, again, as you'll see a bit later.
Right. Fistful of dollars stuff.
Yeah, in fact, come to think of it, I'm not quite sure why we actually ate the horse in view of all that, all those nice fat cows out there.
It might sound a very naive question, perhaps it is, but why Argentina? I mean, Chrysler, American company, why didn't they go to California or something?
That's not a naive question. It's the first question I asked when they asked me to go out there. And I said to them, you know, why this part of the world? Why such a demanding route? And they said, well, for that very reason. You know, I'm used to car manufacturers telling me to test drive a four-wheel drive vehicle on a piece of gravel path. And these guys said, this is the most demanding route in the world. This is one of the toughest roads you could find anywhere in the world. And as you'll see, there were more than roads. There were tracks, there were rivers, there was volcanic dust, all sorts of things. And they said, look, we're confident that you can't break these vehicles. We'll make them, you break them was the challenge, and we couldn't. We all got back in one piece, although a colleague of mine who shall remain nameless happened to roll his down the side of a mountain, but stepped away from it.
Came unscathed, or was all right?
He was all right. I mean, they were more worried about the vehicle than him.
But you had this full backup of medical team and...
Yeah, we had the medics in the helicopters behind us, and mechanics, obviously, and people supplying us with water. I mean, quite seriously, if you don't drink that level of water, then you die out there. It's the most hostile environment I've been for ages. That guy there is James Barber, a Scotsman, one of the expedition leaders. See that machete in his hand? Isn't that typical? Scotsman with a machete. He was going through the countryside.
You can't say that.
Well, sorry to all our Scottish viewers.
Too late. There's the sun glinting there, and well, I have to say the Wrangler certainly looks the part. Good value for money as well, isn't it?
Oh, incredible. It starts at 14 grand. It's actually cheaper than the vehicle it replaces. And you can see that horrible volcanic dust. I mean, you can see some of it on
I know there's some later where you're being towed out of
yeah, exactly.
a rut.
And it's it's amazing, horrible stuff. You can get very, very stuck in that dust. And
Is
afterwards,
this your handiwork here?
and that was some local graffiti artists that mysteriously appeared from the Andes. But you know, coming back to the spec of the Wrangler, it's the sort of, I mean, one of the great features about it, particularly after a journey like this, for example, is that you can actually hose down the interior, dashboard and all. Right. And these vehicles I saw, you know, only a day or two after the trek, and they look like brand new again. That winch on the front of that vehicle, that's driven by the expedition leader, James Barber. I thought it was nice that Chrysler of Detroit actually employed 2 Scottish expedition leaders to lead us, and we were the Brits, the Australians, the Thais, the South Africans. A couple of Scots guys in charge. See, he's leaning out of the window there, not just looking through the front to see of the dangers ahead, but not that this is particularly dangerous, this stretch, but he's looking for rocks that might shred the tyres.
I get the feeling that it was probably far more dangerous than it actually looks, in part.
Oh, it was, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate the point, but, you know, we were putting our lives on the line. I mean, just quite frankly, when Duncan Barber told us to actually go out and drive down little ledges that were as wide as a pencil and soft as an apple crumble, you know, you realise that if you put a foot wrong, you go over the side, and we were 15,000 feet up at some point. So to say that there was sheer drops and immense danger is a massive understatement.
Obviously, a fantastic experience for you, Mike. Well, let's see some more of your exploits now, and we start, I believe, with one of your regular briefing sessions.
Driving this morning, the first section, we're probably going to find a lot of kids and their parents on the road. There'll be animals, there might be bikes, all sorts of things, so watch out for them. As you're going through any areas where there's people hanging about, slow right down so as you don't cover them in stour, because I'm sure they must get really narked off first thing in the morning. They're up, they're clean, and the next thing a horde of vehicles come through and cover them in dust.
Well, the idea was, after this 100-odd mile drive I've had through dirt and grime and water and slime, I've been bitten, I've been chased by dogs, I've seen wild animals that I didn't even know existed, I fell in a river, I lost a 90-quid pair of sunglasses. And the idea was that I was going to be here in the wilds of Argentina, northwest Argentina, stop laughing you lot, northwest Argentina, near Bolivia, somewhere near Uruguay, I think. The idea was I was going to sit here, despite the fact that I've got problems with my eyes because of all the dust. I've eaten more dust today than Mr. Sheen. I've drunk more today than Oliver Reed, although it was of the non-alcoholic variety. They made me drink 8 litres of water because there really is a grave danger out there on the mountain range of dehydrating. And the idea was that I'd sit here on the bonnet of my Chrysler Jeep Wrangler, 1997 model, the vehicle that's been my Sherpa Tenzing for the day. But of course we're in this remote mountain village, the name of which I can't even pronounce. And unfortunately, there was a little reception committee waiting for us, and apparently they're all minding the car. And unless I give them, I don't know what it is, 50 pesetas each by the morning, they'll take the wheels off. So you're looking at Mike Rutherford's Minders. Well, this is pretty amazing. We're somewhere up in a mountain range in northeast Argentina, apparently near the border with Bolivia. If I'm sounding a little bit strange, it might be due to the fact that the air is very thin up here.
Mike Rutherford, as you have never seen him before. That shot of you on the front of that Jeep with those kids will stay with me for a very long time.
Yeah, I've got to tell you, those little Indian kids, Spanish-speaking Indians, if that's not confusing enough, they actually live in clay huts up there. The only power they've got is solar power because there's an awful lot of sun. Hasn't rained up there for 9 months. 100 degrees Fahrenheit plus up there. I mean, how they live there, I just don't know.
Now, one could be very cynical about this, and four-wheel drives are generally very fashionable. They're a fashionable vehicle to own at the moment. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of owners who have four-wheel drives, the conditions that those cars have to compete with, have to actually endure, the most difficult conditions are avoiding other four-wheel drives down the supermarket on a Saturday morning.
Yeah.
So why was it so necessary to go to all this trouble to demonstrate that the Wrangler and the Cherokee, in fact, could actually do the business off-road?
Well, that's the sad thing about people who buy these vehicles, that they use them on the road 99.9% of the time. They just have no idea how capable these things are. And I think that it's quite brave of Chrysler to actually turn around and say, look, we've taken you guys to the Arizona desert, we've taken you to Australia, we've taken you all around the world. You give us the toughest routes, and we're confident that our vehicles will make it over these routes. And it's really a big demonstration from them that they've got the best four-wheel drive vehicles in the world, which I honestly think they have. And I base that opinion on the fact that I've done these drives around the world in Jeeps, and I've driven across gravel paths in things like Land Rovers and Suzukis and Toyotas. In other words, these other manufacturers are not as confident, they're certainly not demonstrating they're as confident about their vehicles as Chrysler of Detroit are.
And this was really the ultimate test, wasn't it, for this vehicle?
Yeah, and I mean, they're basically leaving themselves wide open to big, big problems, because had anything gone wrong with these things, then we'd be talking about it. We ripped a few exhaust pipes off, we ruined a few tyres, we rolled one over, but apart from that, they were great.
Well, it sounds like you had a real experience. Thanks, Mike, and we'll hear more from you, of course, on your report on the BMW Roadster later in the programme.